Hello, my name is Danielle Ocampo. I'll be presenting on primary congenital hypothyroidism today. I chose this because I actually have hypothyroidism, but just not the congenital kind. I didn't get it from birth. So what is it? What is primary congenital hypothyroidism? Well, it's a disease that affects the baby from birth. Something occurs during fetal development. We'll get more into exactly what that is later. And it causes the baby's thyroid gland to not be developed properly. So in most cases, the baby is born without a thyroid, or it's a shrunken thyroid, or it's in the wrong place. Usually the thyroid is supposed to be right here in this neck area, and in these children, it is displaced or non-existent or shrunken down to a small size. So, what are the signs and symptoms of congenital hypothyroidism? So, signs and symptoms, they result from a shortage of thyroid hormones, particularly the thyroid hormones that are at play here are the T4, which is thyroxine, and TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone that are affected. Thyroid stimulating hormone is what tells the thyroid gland to start producing the functional form of thyroid hormone, really, which is T4. The thyroid gland is important and it helps regulate our body's metabolism, growth, and development in the human body, and it also even helps with calcium levels in the blood. So, some of the symptoms that we might see in a baby born with congenital hypothyroidism are decreased activity, difficulty feeding from a bottle or even from the mother, issues with stool, so constipation, sleeping too much, which is called hypersomnia. And so all of these are kind of indistinguishable general characteristics that you might have noticed. And so the babies that are born with this disease, they don't look any different than other babies. So is it dangerous? So like we talked about, the symptoms, they can appear pretty mild and uncharacteristic. They're also, you know, there also are signs that the child may have it, but they're not very distinguishable. Like, a lot of children could have those symptoms. So it's not something that the parent would necessarily be like registering. So, well, if the symptoms aren't that severe, then maybe it's not dangerous, but that's just not the case. As I talked about, the thyroid is actually very important and those hormones are important. So, if the child doesn't get those secreted hormones, then unfortunately, if left untreated, the hypothyroidism can actually cause developmental delay. The child can fall well behind on the growth and development curve. They can even suffer from intellectual disabilities, which used to be called mental retardation, if you're not familiar with that term. So, unfortunately, if these occur, unfortunately, it's treatable, but the damage is done, and it could be permanent or lifelong if not caught early. Which leads us to our next slide. How is it caused? So, what causes it is parabox 8 or PAX8, which is its official gene symbol. It initially, when it's non-mutated, the PAX8 protein is responsible for thyroid follicular cell development and expression of the thyroid-specific genes that allow for normal thyroid development and function. So, initially, if everything's going according to plan and development in the womb, it's not an issue. But what happens is, there are 15 known mutations that can occur on this PAX8 gene that can cause congenital hypothyroidism. So most of these mutations occur from just a change in the amino acid building blocks that are required to make the PAX8 protein. So other mutations can cause a disruption in the protein production, and nearly all PAX8 gene mutations prevent the PAX8 protein from effectively binding to DNA. So here we have the full sequence of what the PAX8 actually looks like. It's pretty long, but it's not anywhere near as long as our DNA. If you uncoiled all the DNA in our body, it would be 67 billion miles long. So that's really nothing compared to that. So mode of inheritance. So usually this mutation occurs at random without a genetic link, but when they can find, or not a genetic link, but when they can find it's actually inherited through our parents, they found that it's considered to be an autosomal recessive inheritance pattern. So what this means is that both copies of the gene will need to to be present for the mutation of this disease to actually like fully occur and be presented. So typically each parent, they could be asymptomatic because you can be a carrier of this and not know. So they would have one copy of the gene, and then if they had children, then this child could actually have the disease. So the good news is that this form is far less formidable than the dominant inheritance pattern. If it were dominant, it would be way easier for somebody to have congenital hypothyroidism because you would just need one copy of the trait instead of two, like in the case with this type of inheritance pattern. So here I have a Punnett Square I drawn out just so we can kind of actually go through what it looks like to inherit this because it is a recessive, autosomal recessive pattern. So this is considered an allele. So this is one gene trait. We'll consider this. So the capital H is actually nothing to do with congenital hypothyroidism. It will not cause it, but the little h will. So for this gene to actually be expressed, there needs to be two little h's. So here we have a parent that doesn't have it, nor is a carrier, and a parent that does. So they have all of their offspring will have a 100% chance of being a carrier for it, but will not have it. So here on this one, we have one parent that is a carrier for it by this little h and one that does have it. So their offspring will have a 50-50 shot of being a carrier for it or actually having the disease. So kind of going off the Punnett squares, this is what they call a pedigree chart. It's kind of like a family tree, and it helps trace genes back to the source. So where we can find out who's a carrier and things like that. So here we have a family tree. We have some grandparents, Terry and Kate. Neither are carriers, nor do they have congenital hypothyroidism. On the other side, we have John, who is a carrier, and we have Lydia. She actually does have the disease. We can tell because of this little mark here. So they have a child, and like we kind of went over with the Punnett square, there would be a 50-50 shot that they would have a child that is a carrier for it or have a child that has it. So they had Jenny. Jenny does have hypothyroidism, and she marries Jim, and they have children. So Jim does not, he is not a carrier, and he does not have it. So kind of the second Punnett square we went over, we can see that he is not a carrier, and she has it, which means that all of their kids will be carriers. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 kids that are carriers. So how do we test for it? So since we know this disease doesn't have any outward signs you can just see with the naked eye, and that you also can be a carrier of it and not know, and symptoms are pretty mild at first, it's actually tested for at birth. So it's tested in something called a newborn screening that's mandated by all 50 states. So this test is actually, thankfully, it's pretty affordable. It's under $200 in most states, and it's typically covered by insurance. So what all they do is it's a blood test that they prick the heel of the baby, and what they're looking for is the TSH and the T4, the thyroxine levels in the blood to make sure that they're at a normal level. So this is sent off to a state public health laboratory for analysis. Should the test results be abnormal, they will notify the parents, and the parents will follow up then with their primary care physician, and they will do a second blood test. But this time it will not be a heel prick, it will be from the baby's actual vein, and that's how they will confirm the diagnosis. So here we just have a picture of what the heel prick test looks like and what the newborn screening circles kind of are. And then it doesn't just test for one thing, it actually tests for many different diseases too, which is a good thing. So treatment. So thankfully the treatment for this is pretty simple. The baby's treated by giving them oral thyroid medication called levothyroxine. Many children will require this medication and this treatment for the rest of their lives because, as we were saying, the thyroid doesn't develop properly in these children with this mutation, and so unfortunately they're most likely going to need this medication the rest of their lives. But thankfully it's pretty easy. It can just be administered orally. It can be crushed up and put in formula or a bottle, or it can be given with a dropper from the mom or the dad. So this is just my reference page. Thank you for watching. I know a lot of you guys are pre-PA students as well, so hopefully I see you in some of the upcoming interviews for this cycle, and I just wish everyone well on your ventures in education, and thanks for watching.